Morning, everyone. I think I know you all. Um, I'm here in Anchorage, Alaska, of course, and we're just finishing up our fake spring, and we're firmly back in winter again. Just had another big snowstorm over the weekend. Um, yeah, so today I'm going to talk about mind, and we'll do some practical exercises and discuss a bit. And I wanted to start by talking about why this is relevant for me, why it's worth talking about. Um, this was essentially the reason I came to Zen. So I used to think it was kind of a crappy reason, like other people had better reasons than me. But now I feel firmly in this reason. I've come back to it as being pretty okay. Um, so the reason I started training in Zen was because I was stuck in the world of my head. It felt like a really painful problem to me. I knew that wasn't the right way to live, and I wanted to find a better way. It's very isolating, right? To be in the world of your head rather than in the world of other people. So in Zen, the tools we have that we talk about a lot are posture, breathing, and some teachers only use those, right? There's a third one that my teacher talked about, which was concentration or awareness. And it's, described in different ways. And that's the one I'm going to kind of talk about more today. But the breathing and the posture are fundamental, right? You have to have those. But if you don't have the other piece, it's a real problem. You can't go through life doing your Zen stuff, right? Setting your hata, taking long, slow breaths, and having a mind that's like a Facebook feed, right? And you're just scrolling through it, that's not Zen. You're not doing it right. So I started to look around at students who had the same problem that I had. It was plainly obvious, right? You can see when somebody's thinking thoughts. And I started to wonder, like, is there a way that I can help them? Explicit, corrections that I can provide them. And I started to wonder, why don't we kind of provide those those corrections, right? And I started to experiment with it a bit. And I'm still working on it. But I found that it was trainable. And yeah, various points led me to getting to the point where, for me, this feels like a really relevant thing to talk about. So the word I'm going to use a lot is mushin, which means, it's a Japanese word. You could literally translate it as no mind, mushin, mind. Yeah. I found when I was preparing for this talk that by looking at Wikipedia, what does Wikipedia say that no mind is, right? They mentioned this, that it comes from this phrase, mushin no shin, which means kind of like the mind without mind. So, what is that? The meaning is something closer to no thought or no self, right? And if I'm really honest about this word, the word sheen, it's actually like heart, or like a heart mind. In Japanese and Chinese culture, or Yeah, languages. You can use that word sheen to describe various things like your spirit, your mind, your heart, right? But if you draw the character, it's really a character for heart. So what does that mean? Like how can you have no heart, no mind, right? Sounds like a dead person, right? What's left? You know, it's somebody who's present, truly present, without thought or emotion, filling them up. And most importantly, not fixed on any one thing, right? The thoughts and emotions may come, but you don't get stuck because there's no self there to get stuck, right? If we want to talk about it in kind of plain language, we can talk about it as being present, being clear-minded, basically being a true human being, right? Somebody who's grounded in their hara, in their whole body, and living moment by moment by moment by moment. So one question is, we talk about the word samadhi a lot. If you've been around us enough, you've heard this word. That word is the translation we like to use is a relaxed state of a relaxed concentration of no self. Yeah. And one question that might come is, what's the difference between mushin and samadhi? And basically, they're the same thing. But samadhi, we often talk about in the context of meditation. And mushin, you can think more about in the context of action. Yeah. So we talk about it a lot in a martial arts context or in the context of something like the wondrous workings of somebody who has come out of, or the wondrous workings that have come out of somebody who has no self, who's transcended life and death. Right? Whatever that means for you. I get the picture of like a samurai in my mind, right? Fighting off 10 guys, one at a time, without feeling completely caught up in fear. Another question that may come up is this like flow? That's a word we use in popular culture. And yeah, it's kind of like that. You may have experienced that. But that kind of state is conditional, usually on one activity, right? Like, oh, I can be in a flow state from doing running or playing a sport that I like, but hard to access when I'm doing something else. Or it may have been a freak kind of occurrence, something that happened that you remember well because it left such an impact, but don't quite know how you got there again or how you got there to get back there again, right? But when we talk about mushin, we're talking about something that's trainable, that you can practice being in your everyday life to the point where you know that you know how to call it up at will. And one of the reasons it's difficult to practice the entry point is difficult to find is that the habit of mental activity is such a deep habit for us, right? It's so deeply ingrained that we think that the mental activity is actually us. We're so used to hearing the voice in our head. We're so used to the constant kind of chatter that we think, oh, that must be me, right? And that's related to our whole conception of self. You could call it Western culture. I'd say it's maybe more like modern culture at this point, right? But that the human being, thinks of themselves, as being up here, right? Because that's where the voice comes from. So we need to start there, right? To really start to get at this thing. And so I want you to, for a moment, a minute, take stock of what's going on up there for you. Like, what are the physical sensations for you this morning? What does it feel like inside your head? What's the feeling associated with thought? Not the thought content. I don't actually care what you're thinking about. But what are your feelings? The physical sensations that are up there. How would you describe it? Cool. Okay, we got some more in the chat. Tight, no wiggle room, sharp edged right angles. Okay, I like these. Lots of tunnels. Nice. Yeah, I mean, and the thing is that these vary from day to day, right? The three common ones I notice are like there's something tight up there. It's almost like there's a muscle up there that's holding, that's like tightening around thoughts, right? And usually if I notice that, I can let it go, right? Yeah, so Rue says tightness, contraction. Um, the other one I notice is like sometimes if I'm really stuck, I can almost feel like there's like arrows, like there's like a lot of pressure, like, right? It's almost like something's like, there's like my head is in a vice. Um, and the other one I notice is something like, there's just like all these things like, I think Anne gave me buzzing around, but it's like all these things flying around up there, the thoughts. And it's important to recognize that you feel these things, right? Because when you do, you can let go of them. They're not actually you, right? It's just like I don't know, like if you were clenching your muscle, you can let it go, right? So then I want to talk about some like cues, like how do we, the cue we actually give you, I would say 100% of beginners when you start is see 180 degrees, right? Like that's one cue that we give when you start about where to place the mind or what to do with the mind. But what I find with that one, do that one now, see 180 degrees. So have a soft focus, right? where you're not just focused on the screen. If you do see the screen, you have a soft focus that sees on both sides of it. But this one, for whatever reason, and it may be with most things, loses like sort of potency over time. So building on that, what I want you to make sure you can do is, can you see both walls at the same time? So what happens when you actually see both walls at the same time? I'm going to go through a few more, and what I want you to notice is, for you, which one is kind of most potent in terms of a cue, brings the biggest change to what's going on inside your head. So another one, it's kind of more like a meditation, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but it comes from Hakuin, and it's called something like butter meditation. And what it does is, as White Lao Roshi says, like where an awareness goes, energy flows, right? So it's like sort of like you're directing your mind in a certain way, and it grounds you, it moves energy. So the meditation is this: you imagine that there's soft butter on your head, and you're sitting there. You can straighten your posture, and imagine this melting butter flowing down, from the top of your head, down your face, down your shoulders, all the way to the bottom. And with it, it's bringing like softness, right? The butter's soft, it's nutritious. And so notice if, what happens upstairs as that butter goes down. What happens to the quality of your mind then? The other one that comes from Hakuin is when you breathe in, okay, breathe out and feel like the exhalation, the air in the exhalation is going out through lots of air holes, like pores on the bottoms of your feet and your lower legs. So take a few breaths like that for a while. Okay, so the reason those kind of ones work is because the thoughts, are associated with ki, with energy, right? And you somehow need to get that energy outside of your head. And if you feel into those thoughts and the physical sensation enough, you may find, like I did, that the thoughts kind of have weight to them. You can let them fall out of there. Just like you can release, different muscular tension in your body by grounding in gravity. Besides, seeing both walls, another one is, can you see out the back of your head? Like you have eyeballs there. And what's the difference when you have that kind of awareness coming out of your back body, out of the back of your head. So that's what one of my favorites. I got that one from Krishna Roshi. Another one that I made up was is focusing 100% outside. You need to relax your face. For me, when I do that, it's like my eyeballs slide slightly forward in the sockets, 100% outside. To do that, you have to be honest with yourself about whether you're multitasking or not, right? Whether there's a residual 10% or 30% being focused inside, right? Because that's what we like to do as human beings. So see if you can have, it's related to the eyes, it's related to the senses, the hearing, but see if you can have the felt sense like your eyes are windows and you're like airing it out up there. 100% focus outside. Okay, so I want to put this into action. Hopefully, you've noted which one is the best one for you. And if you can, I'd like you to stand up and I'd like you to, the assignment is to do a few laps around your space. And you're walking and you're practicing the particular cue that that's working for you the best, the most efficient one. And one story before you leave. The story that goes with this is I was walking around and Yokoyama Roshi was observing me walk around the dojo in Hawaii, and he said to me, "Do you need to think to walk around like that?" And I was like, "No, I don't." So notice, using your cues, what it's like to what it's like to walk without thinking, just walking. Okay, stand up and do it. So, what was your experience? Was it different than the normal walking you do? Yeah. Any comments from anyone about it? Thanks for sharing. And I want to challenge you. You've lived a lot of life, right? You've done walking, navigating obstacles, I would say probably millions of times, which makes you an expert. And so, can you navigate do you really need to think conscious thought to get around those things? Or can you just do it? Sometimes when we get new things, right, it does trigger thoughts that we need to consciously think through, problem solve, right? But there's a lot of things that we've done millions of times that we can do without thinking. When we did this exercise during Keishin, one of the things we practiced after walking was sorting silverware. right? Like after you clean it, you need to put it back in its container. And can you do that without thinking, right? I don't know about in South Africa, but in or Brazil, I assume it's the same, but in every American household, you have like a little container in your silverware drawer where the different stuff goes, and we practice putting it in there. Yeah. See if you can do that with just paying attention, to the activity, doing your cue, but you actually don't need to think about it to do the job. You've done it a billion times. Okay, so let's talk about, the other side of things. Like, is thinking bad? Are thoughts bad? No, that's not what I'm saying. um, you have this great sense organ, you know, upstairs for a reason. It's good for lots of things. Doing math problems, probably completing your jobs, right? Problem solving. The problem is the attachment to thought, the attachment to mental activity as a habit, right? The lack of awareness that you're even doing that, right? You're so used to it, you think that you need to think to walk, but it's not true. And we get confused, right? We think that that thinking is us, but it's not the real you. It's actually getting in the way of experiencing the real you. There's this great metaphor in the Lankavatara Sutra about this silkworm. The silkworm spins the thread and starts to wrap up itself. The Lankavatara Sutra says, wraps up other people, and is charmed with the thread. Right? That's each one of us. We build this cocoon around ourselves, right? Using our minds, and we become fixed in there. And we forget that we all intrinsically possess freedom. We only see the cocoon, right? We think, oh, this thing's really tight. It's annoying. Why is it holding me in here? But you forget that you are the one that made it in the first place, right? And you need to just bust out of there. So your mind can be this small, right? You can be this small. Your world can be this small. Or you can tap into something else, right? We call it big mind. The experience of your everyday mind is sort of like this cycle of happy, sad, right? Based on getting the things if you get the things you wanted, right? Or if something got taken away from you that you wanted or that you're attached to. When we talk about big mind, we say every day is a good day. There isn't any conditionality around that, right? And when the small mind, the small thoughts stop, like the ones of the small mind. When that part becomes quiet, you can have big thoughts. You could even call it wisdom that comes from somewhere else, not coming from up here. Sometimes the experience is like it's coming from your hara. We think of this as the seat of intuition. Sometimes it feels like it comes from somewhere else, someplace true. But it's really more like the internet. It's more like a interweb. Like you're connected to something else. You could call it like the cosmic mind, yeah? The good ideas, good thoughts, big thoughts come from there. So I had this conversation, some of you have heard me refer to it when I moved here with um, a local elder, Alaska Native elder, Alarian Kuyak Merkuliev. And he was talking to me about what he called being a true human being, or real human being was the word he used. And he said, this is somebody who doesn't live in their head, but lives in their heart. And I've done a lot of thinking about whether they live in their heart or their hara. Maybe it's different based on the different tradition you come from. But the concept is the same, right? And when we both agreed when we were talking that the separation from this experience is where the problem comes. It's fundamental to the problems we're in right now, how we got to this place as a society. And it speaks to a place we need to get back to, right? It speaks to something older. You could call it indigenous wisdom, spiritual wisdom. But that's how we also need to move forward. It's fundamental. It really matters. So talking for a minute about why this is relevant for the 49 days training, right? About connection, relationship, practice. One place I want to warn you about in terms of this Mushin stuff, it's a conversation I had with Green Roshi. He told me he's worried when I talk about this kind of stuff that people are going to get the wrong idea and become attached to no thought. Like, oh yeah, I really like this no thought stuff. How do I get back there? I want to hang out there, right? But that's not really the right perspective. That's a transactional relationship with no thought, right? So it's confusing because in Zen, especially Rinzai Zen, we have a lot of goals, right? Enlightenment is kind of out there floating around. We ask you why you're doing Zen training. It's important to have that thing as like a rudder, and then put it aside. And just do the practice, right? You need to have the intention, the why you're doing things to stay on task, but the moment by moment experience is just doing the practice. It's not judging whether you're doing it good, right? That doesn't come in the basic instructions. When we tell you to count the exhalations 1 to 10, if you find yourself thinking thoughts, go back to 1, right? We don't say, if you find yourself thinking thoughts, beat yourself up a little bit. Call yourself names. Think about how you're doing a worse job today than you were yesterday, right? Nope. You just come back to 1 and you keep doing the process. It's very simple. And, so you have that counting that you can be doing, right? If you have a koan, you have that you can place your mind on. And then you also have these physical cues, right? And I'm trying to broaden your repertoire of what works, right? In terms of clearing out the crap up there. And you need to just practice those things. You need to practice being in samadhi. You need to practice being in mushin. It's very important. We all need to practice, right? And we also have other practices we're doing. Some of them are Zen, some of them are creative practices, sports, martial arts, all sorts of things that we do that we have meaning in. And, you should practice doing those things in Mushin too, right? Everyone agrees when they're doing, if you've had the experience of trying to do a practice over years, yeah, maybe you need thought in the beginning when you're learning it, but that's not the end state, right? You don't want to watch a performance of somebody who's thinking thoughts and doing the thing, right? So, yeah, practice to the doing the repetition, right? To get to the point where you can do it without thought. And most of us have a really crappy relationship to practice in the cultures we live in today, right? We want to be good at things without actually practicing them. We want to do the things sporadically when we feel like it, and then magically get better at it. Tanoi Roshi, I've heard used to say that musicians make the best Zen students because they know how to practice, right? There's no expectation that they're going to get better at the thing without practice. And I know that I'm like, I don't know, maybe the worst out of anyone in terms of relationship to practice. I'm definitely that person who wants to be good at things without practicing them. So, one of the books I came across when I was, I don't know, developing this Mushin stuff was this book, The Practicing Mind. Somebody was talking about how it's related to Mushin. And I knew I had this crappy relationship to practice. So I wanted to see what the guy had to say. I don't know that it's like a top 10, like top recommendation for you guys, but I don't know any other book that speaks so directly to the relationship of practice to mind. The guy, he's a musician and a tuner of like a world-class piano tuner, like for really high-level concerts. And he also learned how to golf as an adult. And he uses those kind of experiences to talk about, what are the basics. And the kinds of things he talks about are, repetition, breaking things into parts, going slow, breaking your habits around the particular thing you're practicing, staying engaged in the present moment, and focusing on process versus outcome. And there's something important, right, about that present mind in all of this, right? The present mind that is here now. And there's, a relationship to time that's very important in there. Not just about cutting the before and after, but not skipping over the in between times, right? Like we're all focused on getting from point A to point B. I'm I'm like person number one who's like this, right? It's almost like we just want to beam ourselves there. Like now I'm in my house, I want to be at work. How could I just beam over there and skip the in between? I don't give myself enough time to get there. But you need to not be like rushing around and on other people's time. And you need to not reject the present moment. That's what we're doing all the time, right? When we engage in the thoughts in our head, when we pick up our phones, we're rejecting the present moment in favor of another reality that we prefer. So somehow that present mind, right, experience is really fundamental to the whole thing. That's where, you know, it's hard it's hard to describe without experiencing it for yourself, but that's where the creativity resides, the creative present. Life is there, right? So how do you be in deep relationship to the here and now and in relationship to all things, moment by moment by moment? So relationships, right? These are like, these are like, uh, 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 the invisible threads connecting all things that we're not paying attention to. We don't see them, so we ignore them. But these invisible threads, there's a word we use, shunyata, emptiness, the source of all things, but it's also the relationship between all things. And you need to start to feel into that. They're constantly changing, right? One example is like the relationship between currencies, right? It's not like $1 always equals 100 yen, right? Sometimes the dollar is stronger than the yen, sometimes it's weaker. And if you're watching some sort of chart, it would be changing almost moment by moment. All relationships are changing like that. So life is that free flowing river. Death is your ego wanting it to be fixed in place, right? And making things be like frozen ice instead of like a changing river. Um, I wanted to finish by talking about, have you guys seen the movie American Symphony on Netflix? Okay, you should really watch that movie if you have access. I hope it's in South Africa, Costa Rica. What other countries do we have represented here? Canada. But it's this great movie about this guy, Jean Baptiste. He's a guy from New Orleans, has a really compelling story about he's a musician. He went to Juilliard. Um, he has a background in classical music, jazz, kind of like the brass band music of New Orleans. And he became the band leader of the Colbert Show, a popular show on TV. And he had it tells the story of him preparing what he calls the American Symphony, which was to be like sort of a new version of a symphony that brought in all these disparate types of music in America. And he's going through this experience. It's going to play one time at Carnegie Hall, and at the same time, he got nominated for like 10 Grammys that year, and would be like, oh, he's having the best year of his life. But at the same time, his childhood sweetheart, uh, Suleika, who he met at band camp and becomes married to, has a remission of her leukemia. And these guys are like true creatives, like, and it really paints a picture of what that means, and it's really like a masterclass in what I'm talking about creativity and the creative present. And I wanted to I got this video that came across to me, and I wanted to share it with you, of Suleika talking, and I wanted to give her the last word.
when you're trying to live every day as if it's your last, you're thinking about how you can wring as much out of life, how you can like seize the day, and it like puts you in this space of urgency and taking. And I've come to believe that as well intentioned as that advice might be, it's terrible advice. Because if we were all to live every day as if it were our last, we'd be robbing banks and I don't know,
Or
cheating
just,
on our spouses and
staring at trees or,
eating
yeah.
ungodly amounts of ice cream.
Uh-huh.
And so instead, as I navigate this new level of uncertainty, which of course, we all have, none of us know
It's just more
what the future is
palpable
going
and acute for,
to
yeah,
look
yeah, yeah.
like. And life is a finite condition for all of us. I've shifted to a place of trying to live every day as if it's my first, which is to say, waking up with a sense of curiosity and wonder that a newborn baby might. And rather than seeking out these like huge, important life moments, seeking out moments of play and tiny little joys and moments of nourishment. And that has made it such that I feel like I'm moving through this uncertainty in a way that doesn't put me in panic, but places me in a state of wonder and awe and
Mm.
generosity.
Okay. So, what comments, questions do you guys have? The cocoon is comfy and warm, right? It's amazing to watch them in their relationship go through this very, very difficult time of contrast, right? A lot of like happy, sad, and how they navigate that. It's very, I really recommend watching that movie if you can find it, American Symphony. Anyone else? Yeah, I mean, that's what bothers me about where I still need to develop is like I need to I feel like my all the tools I present there's probably too many of them. I want to get to the point where there's just one. I think what you're saying makes sense, right? That you just focus on one for a while that's working for you. And it may be like a new one works better a week from now or a month from now, but I would stay with one for a while. We're a few minutes over. Any last question? You need to be firmly grounded in your subjective experience, and you need to be honest with yourself, right? That's very important. So, like Rue was mentioning about noticing what are the sort of physical sensations associated with certain emotions, that's very, very important place to start. Because if you don't have that, there's no way you're going to change your relationship to it, right? And you need to be honest about, yeah, what this isn't working anymore, right? I've become able to multitask again, right? I'm doing zazen and also having a conversation with my mother in my head at the same time. You need to be honest about that. Because if you're not, there's no way you're going to get beyond that. Okay. Thanks, you guys. Appreciate you showing up.